Hey folks, it's Patrick. I'm excited to continue with you again this week, reading through the book of Acts. Last week we took a little bit of a break, which sort of makes sense. We're right in the middle of the book, and now we'll start back again with the 14th chapter. So the 14th chapter in the book of Acts is a really interesting one, and we'll take little chunks of it at a time throughout the week. But something that really jumped out at me across this whole chapter is two things. First, there's a really interesting thing that seems to happen anytime Paul enters into a new city. So Paul is beginning his travels with Barnabas, going from city to city, sort of preaching this good news of Jesus Christ. And in each city, he has an opportunity to interact, and he does that with two separate groups usually. Anytime he goes into any city, he starts by going to the temple, going to the church, going to the central religious community that is his home place, and he preaches about Jesus. And he talks about how Jesus is the Son of God and the Messiah that's been long awaited, and he describes how Jesus is playing into this narrative, this long story that began in the very beginning of time and continues even through to today. And he tells that story every time he enters into a religious place. And, you know, some of the people really love it and devote themselves to Christ and convert and really change everything about their way of life, living under this new reign of the Anointed One, Christ. And others just sort of reject it sort of nonchalantly, like, this isn't my jam. And then there's another group who sees it as a threat to their way of life, to their understanding of the world, and in some cases to their sense of power and privilege in the world. And so they start to sort of rally people and start to push Paul out of the community. So after Paul gets pushed out of communities, he usually, almost always, goes from the temple into the town square. And so he's there, he's mending and making nets to sort of support himself financially. And then he's also continuing to preach about this Jesus. And he does it in a little bit different ways because the people he's speaking to don't have the same religious heritage that he does. So they're not Jewish. They don't necessarily know the stories of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and they don't know about the King David. They simply know that Judaism is another religious order within this really diverse kingdom or empire of Rome. And so Paul goes into the streets and he starts talking about how God is alive and present and imminently with us and calling us to change our hearts and minds and devote ourselves to a kingdom that is radically different than the kingdom that they were all used to. So you can imagine there are some folks, especially those who are disenfranchised, who love this story. They want nothing more than for there to be a kingdom where there really is equity, where they actually have a chance to thrive in the world and they actually have an opportunity to make something of themselves. Whereas in Rome, if you're not part of the elite class already, you're not really ever going to get there. So this idea that this new king is bringing about a radical change to the world is really encouraging and really hopeful. And so in the 14th chapter, that really comes to a head where Paul, as he's out doing his thing, he sees a man who's been paralyzed since birth. And seeing the pain that he's experienced and seeing also that he is drawn by this idea of a kingdom, he calls on the power of God and brings healing to him, inviting him to take his first steps into this new kingdom where he has an abundance of worth and dignity and love. And everyone misunderstands it. Universally misunderstands it. In fact, they start thinking of Barnabas as Zeus and Paul as another member of the Roman pantheon, and they actually start putting together offerings to be sacrificed to Paul and Barnabas. So obviously Paul and Barnabas push back against that, but you can start to get a sense of like this thing that we have all devoted ourselves to is radically different than anything else that we experience in the world. This kingdom of God, this beloved community, this Christ are all so counterintuitive to our way of thinking that it's really hard to wrap our minds around, which is why I think this story is so important for us to reflect on. Because I think we in some ways do the same thing when we see God work through someone in our midst. A lot of times we elevate that person to celebrity status, to, I don't know, whatever. We put them up on a pedestal, assuming that they are better or closer to divinity or whatever the case may be. But that's not how our story goes. God is acting and working universally in all of our lives. Every single person is of the same value. And when we allow ourselves to be elevated, or when we elevate other people beyond the total value of humanity held in collective thought, then we start to diminish our own worth, and we also start to diminish the worth of those folks who need to be reminded of the grace of God on a daily basis. God doesn't think of any one person as being better than another. God simply draws us all into this abundant and beloved community where you and I are good enough and worthy of all good things. So anyway, I'm looking forward to reflecting on all of this with you over the next couple of days. I know Edry, Tyler, Rachel, and Brittany always do such an incredible job of really bringing these stories home. And so I invite you to take just the 5 to 10 minutes each day to read a portion in the book of Acts and to continue delving into the ways that God has been active in your life. Anyway, I hope you're well, and if you like this video, if you know somebody who might benefit from participating in this Bible study, consider sharing it on your social media feed or sharing it in an email with a friend who might be able to grow alongside us. Anyway, I hope you're well. Take care. I'll see you soon. Bye.